lecture is about how play and children's gender work together. So essentially it is looking at how the play of boys and girls might differ from one another. I do want to note that this lecture is using the binary of male and female or boy and girl, despite the understanding that gender is a continuum and is not the same as biological sex, but the data and research that we have to date uses the binary understanding of gender as male and female or boy and girl. So that's how we will be referring to things in this lecture, even though our understanding of gender and its difference from biological sex has evolved. First up, to get you thinking about this topic and thinking about what it might mean and how the play of boys and girls might differ from one another, I'd like you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or something to write with or type on. And I'd like you to first start by writing down 3 of your favorite toys when you were a child. And then I want you to take a look at the toys you've written down and think about, were these toys stereotypically boy or girl toys? And what I mean by stereotypically boy or girl is that are these toys that we think of as the kinds of things that boys play with, or are these toys that we tend to think of as girls playing with? Maybe they're more gender neutral. Maybe children who are both boys and girls play with these toys. So think about the toys that you've written down and whether they are stereotypically male, female, or more gender neutral. I'd also like you to think about how those toys that you've listed align with your own gender, your own self-identified gender, and are they a match or are they not a match for the personal gender that you identify with? And why did you play with those particular toys? What do you think influenced you to play with one toy versus another toy, a toy that did align with your gender identity versus a toy that may not have stereotypically aligned with your gender identity? And then the blue box has another question. So I want you to think about, what skills or abilities did those toys that you like to play with develop? So did they develop your verbal abilities? Did they develop your creative abilities, your spatial abilities, your language arts, your numeracy abilities? What do you think you were learning from playing with those particular kinds of toys? And then finally, the pink box, final question. Do you think that these toys or any other toys might lead boys and girls to develop different skills and abilities from each other? So let's say you listed a toy that is stereotypically for girls, and we can assume that many girls might be playing with that toy, and then that toy develops certain skills. Or let's say we have a toy that's very stereotypically boy. We would assume that lots of boys are potentially playing with that toy, and it develops particular kind of skills. Do you think that toys might lead children to develop different skills from one another? If girls are hanging out in the girl range of toys and boys are hanging out in the boy range of toys, and if those toys potentially develop different skills from each other, are we contributing to the development of different skills in boys and girls? So let's get into gender differences that appear to exist between the play of boys and girls. And we'll use our play categories that we have utilized previously. So we'll look at the gender play of related to objects, social play, and symbolic or dramatic play. So in terms of object play, here's some differences that research has shown. So one, just to kind of give you an understanding of when toy preferences start. So typically around the ages of 2 to 3, children are able to name their own gender, name the gender of others around them, and because this new transition in understanding gender has occurred, children are starting to have toy preferences that align with their self-identified gender. So this is why I was asking you on the previous slide about toys that you played with, and do you think that there were toys that were stereotypically boy or stereotypically girl? Because often toys are developed and marketed with boys and girls in mind. So you might think about coming down different aisles in a toy store. Often the girl aisle is pink and purple and sort of pastel princessy kinds of colors, and toys for boys tend to be more primary colors or leaning more towards red, black, blue, silver. There are differences in the types of toys that are available to boys and girls. Girls tend to be doll play, baby play, housekeeping kinds of things, princess fantasies. Boys tend to be more weapons and building materials and action figures. So we do know that toys are developed differently for boys versus girls, and that once boys and girls self-identify as either boys or girls, then they tend to gravitate towards toys that are created supposedly for them. And we'll come back to that notion a little bit more later. This is not something that children just pull out of thin air on their own. It is because adults don't force them, but lead them to playing with different kinds of toys. You might unconsciously take a girl down the girl toy aisle, or at the holidays buy toys for boys that came from the boy aisle or have always been traditionally associated with boys. So these labels come from children, but are led there by the adults in their lives and media and advertisements. And think about those stores that do have boy and girl toy aisles. There's likely to be pictures of girls on the boxes that are affiliated with girl toys, and pictures of boys on the boxes that are affiliated with boys. And then over time, these differences continue to be reinforced, these differences in what boys and girls, the objects that they play with, those differences continue to be reinforced by adults, but they're also reinforced by peers as well, because once children latch on to notions that boys and girls are different and should be doing different things from each other, one, that's very hard to undo, but two, that sort of enters the lexicon or the vocabulary of their peers as well, and what peers of different genders are supposed to be engaging in. Now, this is why I was asking you also on the previous slide about, do you think that different toys lead to different skills? And yes, they do. There is evidence to show that girl toys tend to foster verbal and relational skills, artistic skills, whereas boy toys tend to foster more adventuresome, creative, also math, spatial awareness, so that boys and girls toys don't just look different or don't just have different colors, they lead to different kinds of skills and abilities on the part of children. So one, we don't really want to be doing that, right? We don't want to automatically set kids up. Like, I don't want to say to a girl, like, you can't have spatial skills because you're a girl, or a boy, you can't have emotional relational skills or verbal skills because you're a boy. I would hope that we're helping children to develop all kinds of skills. So that's problematic. But it also becomes problematic in that children who tend to or develop particular skills early tend to gravitate towards particular kinds of toys. So let's say you have a child who is very verbal, or a child who, maybe a girl child who's encouraged to use verbal skills very early on. That child is going to lean heavily towards toys that sort of match their abilities. And that's more likely if those abilities and your gender match the gender of that particular toy. So girls who tend to be very verbal tend to lean heavily into traditional girl toys. And boys who have better math skills, spatial skills early in their life tend to lean more heavily into more traditional boy toys. So that's great in the sense that they're further developing these skills that they already have, but it's now taking kids who already have really good skills in an area and sort of cutting them off from developing other skills. So if a boy with really good spatial skills tends to only play with boy toys, they might be missing out on the ability to develop those verbal or relational skills that would be open to them if they were also interacting with more traditional girl toys. So a lot to unpack in terms of what children are doing in terms of their object play and what does it mean for their developmental skills and abilities. So there are also some gender differences in how boys and girls play socially. So one thing is that, and remember, these are all tendencies. I'm not saying that every single child follows these patterns. There are many boys and girls who do not follow these strict gender patterns, but these are leanings. So these are, many children who are boys and girls kind of fall in these patterns, not all of them. So in terms of social play, there is a lot of evidence to show that boys do much more rough and tumble play. Girls tend to play in more quiet kinds of activities. So you'll see in the third bullet that girls tend to engage in more turn-taking and low conflict kind of games. Boys tend to negotiate and disagree more, and rough and tumble play is the primary opportunity to negotiate and disagree because you might be injuring someone or how much is too much. Girls tend to do more of the hand clapping kinds of games that you see in the picture to the right bottom. Another difference that we notice is that boys tend to play in larger packs. They have a wider friend group. Girls often sort of split up and kind of hang out in pairs of them. Not so often sort of big group play, but more pair play. Boys tend to play more independently. Girls tend to seek more adult help. Part of this is on the adults because there's a lot of evidence to show that adults let boys free range in the neighborhood more than they allow girls to do that. They tend to keep girls closer to them. They tend to foster relationship with girls and encourage boys to go off and play and be with their age mates. So we are often contributing to these differences among boys and girls. They're not necessarily innate differences. The rough and tumble one does seem to be somewhat innate in terms of boys and girls, but many of these other things are encouraged. When we say boys will be boys, but girls don't roughhouse, you are sending a direct message that girls should be engaging in low conflict, turn-taking kinds of games, and that it's perfectly appropriate for boys to get a little wild and then have to negotiate and figure out their conflicts. There are also symbolic play differences between boys and girls. So when girls are engaged in fantasy play, so imagining things that maybe are not in the here and now, they tend to like more realistic looking props. Boys are more comfortable in creating and using props that may not look so realistic to the type of fantasy play that they're engaging in. It's not that girls don't engage in kind of more flights of fancy, but they do tend to be more likely to choose domestic and family roles, so things related to the home. Again, not necessarily surprising because we are developing toys for girls that are often based on home and domestic activity. We discourage boys from going into housekeeping. We create housekeeping scenarios that are attractive to girls. So again, there's a lot of adult responsibility here in these differences. And because of the kinds of play scenarios that we set up, the toys that we produce for young boys, the shows that we produce for young boys, they tend to be more action-oriented, high drama. No surprise that boys tend to gravitate towards action-oriented, high drama roles. So superheroes and Power Rangers and all of those kinds of things, because we're we're creating a world where it would be hard for children to lean any other direction than the directions that they lean. As I've been noting in the last few slides, adults matter in terms of children's gender behaviors, gender interests, gender-related play, and many of the differences that we see have nothing to do with innate differences between boys and girls. There are honestly very few innate differences between boys and girls, but there are many developed differences between boys and girls. And again, this is more due to the kinds of experiences and input that boys and girls are receiving throughout their childhood in terms of why we see gender differences later on, or even when children are young, versus something that is innately present in boys and girls at birth. So teachers are not exempt from this. Teachers are adults, and teachers exist in the world, and teachers are often perpetuating and delivering gender-coded and related messages. So we do know from research that teachers encourage children to engage in gender-typical behaviors, that we dissuade boys and girls from behaving in different kinds of ways. We encourage them to interact with and play with different kinds of materials. So we are part of this process. And we tend to be most gendered with boys. Girls do have more latitude in the things that they are allowed to do. So, typically if girls are playing sort of outside of their gender typical role, or playing with toys that maybe aren't so gender typical, it's often kind of given a pass. And so girls are allowed to do more gender neutral or stereotypical boy kinds of things and exhibit those non-gendered behaviors, whereas our messages to boys tend to be more strict. We tend to shut down things that we don't see as masculine. So particularly for boys, we should really exercise caution and think about how we can make the world a little more gender neutral and not push boys so hard into what we perceive to be as gender appropriate behavior and play and objects to be interacting with. This orange bullet on this page is kind of food for thought also. So there is evidence to show, at least some evidence, that when boys and girls play and behave in gender appropriate ways, they're more accepted by their peers. Again, is this something innate in human children, that they will reject other children if they're not behaving in a gender typical way or playing with gender typical toys? Or is this because we're giving explicit and non-explicit messages to boys and girls every single day about what we consider to be appropriate, and that children are just picking up on the messages that we're delivering? They're just receiving it and not questioning it. And because we demonstrate that we think that the best boys and girls, and putting best in air quotes, if the best boys and girls are the ones who subscribe to gender typical play and behavior, and children think that we're important and that we know stuff, they're likely to follow our lead. And that might be why we're seeing that level of acceptance for more gender typical play among peers. So another caution for us as professionals working with young children is not just promoting gender typical behavior and activities and play with toys or play with others, is that we want to also be careful that we're not making assumptions about children's families and the direction that they might be headed down the road in terms of gender and sexuality. So I really want it to be clear. I'm not assuming that children are sexual beings and that we're worried about their sexual feelings when they're very young, but some of us work with older children, and we know that eventually people become teenagers, and though that's part of their land, we also know that children live in families. And I think another really important part that we need to remember is that we're working with children in a professional capacity. So how we treat children and how we navigate their lives is not about our own ideas, beliefs, and values. Your beliefs and values are your beliefs and values, and they are part of what you do at home and for your own personal self. But when we are working in a professional capacity with other people's children and families, it's our job to be neutral in all aspects and to treat all people that we interact with kindness and respect, and to not promote our values for that family or for that child. So, I know that there's a lot in the media right now about grooming children and trying to make them believe a particular way, and I'm actually advocating completely the opposite. I'm advocating not having children believe that you think any particular way. And what that means is that we're neutral in how we navigate the world. And we're neutral in that we're not promoting that one family structure is better than another. We're not also saying, though, that a family structure is less okay than another. We're saying that children live in different families and whatever family you live in is okay. And there are different toys to play with, and whatever toy you would like to play with is okay. And people can dress in different ways, and however you'd like to dress is okay. So I'm not promoting any particular way. I'm just saying whatever you would like to do with your own personal self and in your own personal family is fine. But there is also evidence, in addition to the evidence that shows that teachers do promote gender typical behaviors and attitudes and emotions and play with objects, there's also evidence to show that teachers and adults tend to assume and promote a heterosexual life. And again, I don't mean this in terms of sexuality in its most explicit sense. I just mean that assuming that a boy is going to get married to a girl somewhere down the line. It's okay to talk about, someday you might get married to someone. That's perfectly fine. But we don't need to say someday you're going to get married to a boy. We don't know that. And we don't know what families children are coming from. And it's not our job to be disparaging to anybody's families or to any person's personal decisions. That's not what professionals do. If that's, whatever your beliefs are in your own time and with your friends and with your family, that's completely up to you. But in a professional setting, we have to engage in professional behaviors, which means being neutral about things that even if we have a particular opinion about them. So I'm going to give you an example of an article. So it was a bunch of kids and they were pretending to go on a trip. And the boys were saying, we're going to sit up front because we're the drivers, and you girls have to sit in the back, and you're going to pack us a lunch, and you're going to bring that for us so that we can eat later. This is a golden opportunity as a teacher to sort of break down those kind of stereotypical ideas about boys and girls and men and women, and maybe ask some questions like, oh, why do only the boys get to sit up front? Why does the boy get to drive? Why is the assumption that the girls are going to be sitting in the back and making the food for everyone to eat? Or if children are pretending wedding and they're hunting for a boy to walk down the aisle with the girl, it's okay to say, like, do we need a boy to walk down the aisle with the girl? Could we have our wedding a different way? Again, not promoting something alternative, but questioning why does it have to be this particular more traditional way? Because again, that's not all children's lived experiences, and we want to make sure that all children's lived experiences get to be represented in our classrooms. So to wrap up this lecture, I'd really like to encourage you to help children to see other ways of playing with each other, other ways of navigating the world. I hope that we can all agree that boys, it's okay if they play with baby dolls because they might have babies someday, and girls aren't the only ones who have babies and need to practice caring for babies or taking care of their homes. And often girls need to fix things and build things and put them together. I personally very much enjoy mowing the lawn and building IKEA furniture and doing yard work, and I wouldn't want that to not be open to me just because I'm a girl. So I believe that in general people agree with these things, that there don't have to be strict roles for boys and girls. So it's really important for us as early educators to give children opportunities to behave in all kinds of ways and to interact with all kinds of materials and objects and to interact with one another. So there is a wonderful company called Let Toys Be Toys. I would encourage you to check out the website on this page, because companies like this are doing active work to try and challenge stereotypes and heteronormativity within the toy industry, because the toy industry is a big part of why children play the way they do and develop the skills that they do and take on beliefs about what it means to be boy and girl in our world. So thinking about how you can be gender neutral in all aspects of your work with young children, but particularly related to play and toys.